I didn't say a word when I handed over the keys. I didn't cry. I didn't explain myself. I just set them on the kitchen counter, turned around, and walked out of the house I had paid for. That was 8 months ago, and I'm only now able to talk about what actually happened. All of it, from the beginning. Because for a long time, I was too ashamed to admit how far I had let things go. My brother's name is Conrad. He's 4 years older than me, and for most of my life, I thought that meant he was wiser, steadier, more deserving of the breaks that life hands out. Our parents raised us in Sudbury, Ontario, in a small house on a street where everyone knew everyone, and debt was something you didn't talk about at the dinner table. Dad worked in the mines. Mom worked at the school board. They were careful people, quiet people, and when Conrad and I were growing up, I always assumed he had absorbed that carefulness the way I had. I was wrong about that, but it took me 31 years to figure it out. I'm a dental hygienist. I've been working at the same clinic in Barrie since I was 24, right after I finished my diploma at Georgian College. I'm not rich. I have a good salary, I budget carefully, and over the years I managed to save a decent amount. Not because I was earning more than anyone else, but because I was paying attention. I tracked my spending. I had an RRSP. I didn't carry a balance on my credit card. I know that sounds boring, and maybe it is, but it meant that when I was 29, I had enough for a down payment on a small condo, and I bought it, and it was mine. I have a daughter. Her name is Phoebe, and she was 6 years old when all of this started. Her father and I separated when she was 2. We're civil. He's involved, and I don't have any bitterness about the way things turned out between us. But I was raising her mostly on my own, in a 2-bedroom condo in Barrie, making it work. Conrad had been living in Brampton with his girlfriend Tamsin for about 3 years when the first conversation happened. They'd been together for a while, and I liked Tamsin well enough. She was funny, a little sharp-tongued, but in a way that felt honest rather than mean. She worked in pharmaceutical sales. Conrad was in logistics coordination for a trucking company. Between the two of them, they made reasonable money. Not extraordinary, but reasonable. The problem was Conrad's credit. I didn't know the full story right away. He'd told me pieces of it over a few different phone calls. A credit card he'd let go to collections in his mid-20s. A car loan that had gone sideways. Some old cell phone debt that had been sold to an agency. He said he'd been working on it. He said Tamsin's credit was clean but not long enough established to carry a mortgage on her own. He said they'd found the perfect place. A semi-detached in a neighborhood just outside Hamilton. And the numbers worked, but the bank wouldn't approve them without a cosigner with a solid credit history and some assets behind them. He asked if I would be his cosigner. I want to be honest about what I was thinking in that moment, because I've spent a lot of time sitting with it since. I wasn't naive. I knew what cosigning meant. I'd read enough personal finance content to understand that cosigning a mortgage makes you equally responsible for the debt. That if the primary borrowers default, it falls on you. I knew this. But Conrad was my brother, and he sat on the phone with me for almost an hour explaining how much this meant to him, how Tamsin wanted to stop renting, how they had the monthly payments covered, how he just needed someone to vouch for him because the system had held one rough patch against him for too long. He said I was the only person he trusted to ask. He said Mom and Dad couldn't do it because their own mortgage wasn't fully paid off. He said he would never let anything happen to my credit. He said it like a promise. I said yes. The mortgage was approved in the spring. The house was $99,000, not unusual for the Hamilton area by then. They put down $60,000, which was Thompson's savings, and the mortgage came in at just under $530,000. My name was on the paperwork. My credit score was the one that made it happen. I went to the signing. I sat at the table at their real estate lawyer's office in Burlington, and I signed my name in 7 different places. And I smiled at my brother, and I told him I was happy for them. And I was. I genuinely was. The first year was fine. Conrad sent me an e-transfer every month, just $50, like a thank you gesture, and he checked in regularly. He and Tamsin had us over for a barbecue in the summer. Phoebe played in their backyard. I remember thinking, this worked out. I helped my brother, and nothing bad happened. I should have known that the story wasn't over just because things felt quiet. It started shifting in the second year. The e-transfer stopped. Conrad said they were tightening up for a kitchen renovation and he'd restart them once that was done. I told him it wasn't necessary, that I hadn't been doing it for the money. He said he appreciated me, and then the calls got shorter and the invitations stopped coming, and I started noticing that when I reached out, there was always a small delay before he responded, and when he did, something in his tone had changed. I couldn't name it at first. It was subtle, a certain flatness, a sense that our conversations had moved from warmth to transaction, like he was managing me rather than talking to me. Phoebe asked me once why we didn't visit Uncle Conrad in Tamsin anymore. I told her they'd been busy. She accepted that the way 6-year-olds accept things, completely and without follow-up. I wished I could do the same. The moment everything cracked open was a Tuesday evening in March. I had just finished my last patient of the day, and I was in the parking lot when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a Hamilton area code, but not Conrad's cell. I almost didn't answer it. I'm glad I did. The man on the other end introduced himself as Wentworth. He said he was a neighbor on Conrad Street. He said he was calling because he'd found my contact information through, and this part still turns my stomach when I think about it, a document that had been left on the curb with a recycling bin, a mortgage-related document, with my name, my address, and my phone number on it. He said he was calling because he thought I should know what was happening at that house. What was happening, according to Wentworth, was that Conrad and Tamsin had not been living there for at least 2 months. The house appeared occupied, lights on, cars in the driveway occasionally, but it wasn't Conrad's car. Wentworth had introduced himself to the people coming and going and had been told that they were friends staying for a bit. The lawn hadn't been maintained since the fall. There was a notice on the door from the city about a bylaw infraction, long grass, accumulated debris on the side yard. And there had been, Wentworth told me very carefully, a letter from the mortgage lender taped to the mailbox 2 weeks ago. He had not read it, but it was from a financial institution and it had been sitting there, exposed, for 12 days before someone took it. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes after I hung up the phone. The street was quiet, it was getting dark. I could hear the heat running and Phoebe's voice on a video she was watching on her tablet in the back seat. She was laughing at something. That sound, her laughing, completely unaware, is what made me stop shaking and start thinking. I called the mortgage lender that night after Phoebe was in bed. I was on hold for 40 minutes. When I finally got through, the representative confirmed, in the careful, measured language they use when they're telling you something catastrophic, that the account associated with my co-signing had missed 2 consecutive payments. A third missed payment would trigger formal default proceedings. My credit would be impacted. I would be contacted directly as the co-signer. I asked why I hadn't been contacted already. She said the primary borrowers had been marked as reachable and had been in communication with the collections team, which meant Conrad knew. Conrad had been talking to the bank, and he had not called me. I tried his number 4 times that night, voicemail every time. I texted, I said, "Call me, it's about the mortgage. I'm not angry, I just need to talk." No response. I tried Tamsin's number. I still had it from an old group chat, and she picked up on the second ring, which told me my number hadn't been blocked, which somehow made it worse. She was polite, distant. She said Conrad wasn't available. She said they had been dealing with some unexpected financial pressure and had been in touch with the lender. She said they had it under control. I said, "Tamsin, my name is on that mortgage. If it goes to default, it's my credit on the line. I need to understand what is happening." She said she understood. She said she'd have Conrad call me in the morning. He didn't call in the morning. What happened instead was that I drove to Hamilton on my day off, on a Thursday, with Phoebe in the backseat and a bag of her craft supplies, so she'd have something to do if I needed her to wait in the car. I had the address. I had a set of keys, given to me at the time of purchase as the co-signer, as was standard practice and which Conrad had apparently forgotten about. The house did not look right, not dramatically wrong, not abandoned or broken. But the small signs were there. The recycling bins were pushed to the side of the driveway at an odd angle. like they'd been moved once and never straightened. One of the front window blinds was tilted. There was a plastic bag caught on the porch railing that had been there long enough to fade in the UV. I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again and waited a full 2 minutes. Then I used my key. The house smelled like takeout containers and something slightly damp. It was furniture. Their furniture, mostly intact, but there were signs of people I didn't recognize having been there. Extra air mattresses stacked in the corner of the living room. Different shoes by the door. An unfamiliar jacket on the hook. I didn't go through their things. I walked through each room quickly, confirmed no one was home, and I stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at the counter where I had stood 2 years earlier with a bottle of wine, and told my brother I was proud of him. Then I looked at the wall beside the fridge. They had a small corkboard there, the kind people use for coupons and takeout menus and kids' drawings, except Conrad and Tamsin didn't have kids, and what was pinned to this corkboard, among various other papers, was a printed photo of Phoebe, my daughter. It was a photo from my own social media, a public post I'd made the previous summer of Phoebe at a splash pad in Barrie. She was in her bathing suit, arms out, laughing. Someone had printed it out and written beside it in red pen, "Don't let this one inside." I stood there for a very long time. My hands were cold. I could hear Phoebe in the car. I had left the window cracked and she was singing quietly to herself, one of the songs from a show she liked. I heard her voice and I looked at that photo with those words written on it, and I understood very clearly that I had made a catastrophic mistake in trusting the people who lived in this house. Not just financially, in every way. I took the photo off the corkboard. I took a picture of the corkboard itself, with my phone, so I had documentation of where it had been. I walked back out of the house, locked the door behind me, got into my car, and told Phoebe we were going to find somewhere to get soup for lunch. She said she wanted pho. There was a place she liked in Barrie, she said. Could we go there instead? I said yes. I drove back to Barrie. I got her pho. I sat across from her at a small table and watched her try to manage the noodles with chopsticks, and I didn't say a single word about what I had just seen, because she was 7 years old and she was happy and she didn't need to know. But I was making calls in my head the entire time. The first call I made, that same evening, was to a lawyer. I'd looked one up during the drive home, a woman who specialized in real estate and contract law, with an office in Barrie. I left a voicemail explaining the situation in broad strokes and asked for an urgent appointment. She called me back within the hour, which I did not expect, and we spoke for 20 minutes. She asked me 2 questions that I will remember for the rest of my life. First, are you the cosigner, or are you a corkboard thrower? And second, what does the original mortgage agreement say about the rights of the cosigner in the event of default? I didn't know the answer to the second question. I had the documents at home. I had kept every piece of paper from the signing, and that night I found them and I read them more carefully than I had ever read anything. There was a clause. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't something the lawyer at the signing had drawn my attention to, but it was there. In the event of consecutive missed payments, the cosigner, in their capacity as an equally responsible party on the loan, had the right to seek legal remedy including, under certain conditions, the right to petition for sale of the property in order to settle the debt and protect their financial standing. I called the lawyer back the next morning with that clause highlighted. She said, "Good. Keep everything. Don't contact your brother again without documentation, and don't let anyone in or out of that house without notice." I want to tell you what happened when I finally reached Conrad, because it didn't go the way I expected. He called me, finally, 4 days after I'd driven to Hamilton, not because he'd had a change of heart, because Tamsin had apparently told him I'd been inside the house and he was angry. He didn't say hello. He said, "You had no right to go in there." I said, "My name is on the mortgage, Conrad. I have a legal right to be in that property." He said the situation was temporary. He said they'd had a rough stretch. His hours had been cut. Tamsin's sales territory had been restructured. It had been a hard season. It would get better. He just needed time. He said I was overreacting. He said I was making a family situation into a legal situation, and that wasn't what family did. I said, Conrad, there was a photo of Phoebe on your corkboard, with a note telling whoever was in your house not to let her inside. Silence. Then, that wasn't meant for you to see. I said, I know it wasn't. He said it was just a misunderstanding. He said Tamsin had been stressed and had said some things she didn't mean, that they'd had some people staying over who didn't know Phoebe, and Tamsin hadn't wanted anyone to be confused about who was supposed to be in the house. He made it sound almost reasonable, the way you can make almost anything sound reasonable if you speak calmly enough and use the right words. But I had a photo of that corkboard on my phone, and I had a lawyer's number in my recent calls, and I had read that clause 3 times. I said, I'm not going to argue with you about what it meant. What I need is for you to get current on the mortgage within 30 days, or I'm going to exercise my rights as cosigner to protect my credit and my financial standing. I have the paperwork. I have counsel. I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I am telling you clearly what I will do if nothing changes. He told me I was being dramatic. He told me Dad would be ashamed of how I was handling this. He told me this was exactly why I'd never been able to maintain a relationship, because I turned everything into a fight. I let him finish. Then I said, 30 days, Conrad. And I hung up. The 30 days passed. Nothing changed. The mortgage lender flagged a 3rd missed payment. I received official notice as cosigner. My lawyer filed the initial paperwork to begin the process of compelling a sale, which in Ontario is a serious legal action. It doesn't happen overnight, but the filing itself is a formal notice, and it triggered a cascade of responses that I hadn't entirely anticipated. The first call came from my mother. She was upset in the way my mother gets upset. Not loud, but compressed, like she was containing something much larger with enormous effort. She said she'd heard what I was doing. She said I was going to put Conrad and Tamsin on the street. She said there had to be another way. She asked why I hadn't come to her first, why I hadn't given the family a chance to work it out internally. I said, Mom, I gave Conrad 30 days and he didn't call me once. She said family didn't take family to court. I said, my name is on that mortgage. If it goes to default and I don't act, it affects my credit for 7 years. I have a daughter. I have a condo. I can't absorb that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I've thought about 100 times since. You were always the one who did things by the book, weren't you? She meant it as a criticism. I took it as a fact. The next call was from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, who informed me that the family was very concerned and that I should think about what I was doing. I thanked her for calling and said I was thinking about it very carefully. And then, 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and it was Harlow. Harlow was Tamsin's older brother. I had met him once at a party at Conrad and Tamsin's house the first summer they'd moved in. He was quiet, a little reserved, worked in commercial real estate in Mississauga. I had no particular impression of him except that he'd been kind to Phoebe when she'd knocked a cup of juice off a patio table, and he'd helped her clean it up without making a fuss. He said, I'm calling on my own, not for Tamsin, not for your brother. I want to be clear about that. I said I understood. He said, I've seen the filing. I know what's happening. And I want to tell you, for what it's worth, that what was done to your daughter's photo, what was written on it, I don't agree with that. And I don't think you should have to absorb the financial consequences of this situation. I didn't say anything for a moment. He said, I've spoken to a colleague about potentially purchasing the property to resolve the mortgage and release you from the co-signing obligation. It wouldn't be immediate, but it could be structured as a private sale that settles the debt and removes your name from the title. If you're willing to pause the legal action for 60 days, I can put something together. I told him I would talk to my lawyer. My lawyer said it was worth exploring, as long as everything was in writing and my release from the mortgage was absolute and documented. Over the next 6 weeks, Harlow arranged a private sale to a numbered company he was connected with through his real estate work. Conrad and Tamsin were given a settlement that covered their equity, the $60,000 down payment, minus the missed mortgage payments, which came to roughly $42,000 net. It wasn't what they'd hoped for when they bought the place, but it was something. The mortgage was discharged. My name was removed from the title. My co-signing obligation was fully released. I received a letter from the lender confirming the discharge. I read it 3 times. Then I put it in the same folder where I kept the original mortgage documents and the clause I had highlighted in yellow, and I put that folder in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Conrad didn't call me when it was finalized, neither did Tamsin. I received a brief text from my mother saying she hoped things would settle down now, which was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was going to get. I didn't respond for 2 days. Then I wrote back. I hope so too. Phoebe doesn't know any of this. She doesn't know about the photo on the corkboard, or the note beside it, or what it meant that someone had printed her picture and written those words next to her face. She knows that Uncle Conrad and I had a disagreement about some grown-up stuff and that we're not really in touch right now. She accepted that the same way she accepts most things, with a directness that I envy, and a trust that I'm still determined to deserve. Last month, I refinanced my condo. My credit score was intact. Not a single mark on it from any of this, because I had moved before the default could land. The mortgage broker I worked with said I was in good shape. She asked if I had any co-signed debts. I said no. She said that was smart. I didn't tell her it was a lesson I'd had to learn the hard way. Sitting in a car in a Hamilton parking lot on a Thursday afternoon with my daughter in the back seat asking for pho, while I tried to understand how the person I had vouched for had quietly put a note on my daughter's photo and never once thought I'd find it. I think about Harlow sometimes, how he called because he thought it was the right thing to do, not because anyone asked him to. How he helped resolve something that wasn't his problem to solve. How the person I expected least to show up, someone I had met once at a party who had helped Phoebe clean up a spilled juice without making a fuss, turned out to be the one who made it right. Some people surprise you in the worst direction. And some people, when it matters most, just quietly do the decent thing. I keep that clause highlighted in my folder. Not because I plan to co-sign anything again. I won't. But because I want to remember that the moment I stopped waiting for Conrad to fix it and started reading the actual paperwork was the moment I had a path forward. The house sold to new owners 6 weeks after the discharge. I drove past it once without meaning to, on my way back from a client referral in the area. There were kids' bikes on the front porch that hadn't been there before. The blind in the front window had been straightened. I didn't stop. I had Phoebe in the back seat again, talking about something that had happened at school, a disagreement with a friend, something about whose turn it was to pick the game at recess, something that would resolve itself by morning, the way those things always do. I listened to her talk. I kept driving, and I didn't look back. I still think about that corkboard. The way the light in Conrad's kitchen was the same as it always was, ordinary, a little yellow, and how something that wrong was just pinned there like a grocery list. I've had a long time to sit with what happened, and I don't think it came down to one bad decision. It came down to a slow drift away from something I actually believe, that the way you treat people, especially people who can't protect themselves yet, is the most honest thing about you. Conrad didn't make one mistake. He made a series of choices, each one a little further from the person I thought he was. And eventually those choices added up to a note written in red pen beside my daughter's face. That's not a rough patch. That's a kind of character. What I've come to understand is that my own part in it wasn't just naivety. It was something closer to a failure of honesty. With myself, mostly. I knew Conrad had a history of not following through. I knew the dynamic in our family rewarded the person who needed the most managing. I knew all of that, and I still signed my name because I wanted to believe the version of my brother that existed in my head more than I wanted to look at the one standing in front of me. That's on me. And I had to own it before I could move past it. The thing that actually got me through wasn't anger. Anger was there. I won't pretend it wasn't, but it wasn't useful on its own. What got me through was sitting down with that mortgage document at 11 o'clock on a weeknight, with Phoebe asleep down the hall, and reading it word by word until I found the clause that gave me a path forward. That's not dramatic. It's just the work. The quiet, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of understanding what you actually signed and what it actually means. I think a lot of people in painful situations are waiting for someone to rescue them, or for the other person to come around. and they're not reading the paperwork. Read the paperwork. Harlow called because he thought it was right. He didn't have to. Nothing required him to get involved, and getting involved cost him something in terms of his relationship with his sister. He did it anyway, because some people have a North Star they actually follow when it matters, not just when it's convenient. I haven't forgotten that. I don't think I will. What I want for Phoebe, and I think about this a lot, is that she grows up understanding that being a decent person and being a clear-eyed person are not in conflict. You can be both. You can love your family and still read the clause. You can extend trust and still keep the documents. You can walk away from something without it breaking you, if you walked toward it with your eyes open and you left with your integrity intact. I kept the clause highlighted in yellow, not as a reminder of what went wrong, but as proof that when I finally stopped waiting and started paying attention, I found my own way out. That's what I want her to learn from me. Not that people are unkind. She'll figure that out on her own soon enough. But that when they are, you don't have to collapse. You just have to know what you signed.